Unconventional Soldier, a military podcast brought to you by two British Army veterans in association with ISARR.com.
Thank you for downloading another episode of the podcast. Our guest today is Nick, a former member of 22 SAS, and we're going to discuss his deployment to the Falklands with the regiment in 1982 on Operation Corporate. We won't cover the history of the outbreak of the Falklands War, as this was covered extensively in Pod 9 with Jimmy Moran and on his account of Three Paris deployment and the Battle for Mount Longdon. We also covered the Falklands campaign with Brum Richards on the naval gunfire support provided by one freight battery on that operation. And if you haven't listened to either of them, they're highly recommended, really informative. I learnt a lot from them about the Falklands War, which I wasn't aware of. And then finally, we'll finish off with Desert Island Dits, Nick's choice of book, film and luxury item. But as usual, we'll start off with our guest's backstory and how he ended up serving with the military and then with 22 SAS. So Nick, your backstory please.
Hi guys, and thanks very much for the invite to the Unconventional Soldiers podcast. Joined the army in July of 1974 at 16 in the Junior Parachute Company. Was there for about 6 months and then went through the Parachute Regiment depot, completing the Para depot in about July of 75. And then I got posted to one Para who were in Berlin at that time.
Did you have any family history in the army, Nick? My
old man Ken, he was in the King's Regiment based out of Liverpool, saw active servicing career in the 1950s. He was the platoon sergeant with the battalion during the Battle of the Hook.
What did he think of you going to Hereford? He must have been dead chuffed with when you got in.
He obviously would have known about the SAS. I applied at the age of 21 to do selection. I had obviously a good 5 years in one Para, but was getting a little bit fed up with exercises, etc. And while we had done one operational tour in Northern Ireland, I needed to move on. I hadn't told my dad, my parents, I was going on selection. So I think in about the December of 79, I got permission from the signal platoon boss, a guy called Dick Trigger, an outstanding leader. But then in the May of 1980, there was obviously the Iranian embassy siege, and B Squadron got heavily involved in that and retook the embassy down. So I remember sat at home, and it's all obviously on the TV news, and my dad doesn't know anything about really the SAS, and we watch it. And even at that point, I told him I'm going on selection. And then when I pass it, it's like the light bulb clicks and comes on, and yeah, you've done it, well done.
You passed selection at 22, which, from my understanding, if there is an average age, it's normally sort of mid-20s. Was that quite unusual passing at the age of 22 back then?
Yeah, no, definitely. There are guys who passed it before and after around about the same age. There was a guy on the selection course with me. He was 21 when he completed it. There was probably about 180 of us started the course, and so you can imagine the course sort of filled up after the Iranian embassy siege. 180 people started, about 8 people passed it. So 22, yeah, it is a young age. The average age is 26, 27.
So what squadron was you posted to, and what became your speciality? What troop did you go to?
So I got posted to D Squadron, and the air troop of that squadron. At 22 SAS, there are 4 squadrons, A, B, D, and G, and they're all made of the same composure. So they've all got 4 troops, an air troop, boat, mountain, and mobility. They're the infiltration skills that will allow personnel to get into the target and in some cases back off the target. In addition to those troop infiltration skills, they've got individual skills, signals, demolition, medics, and linguists.
And what was the main difference from your perspective between life in a parachute company and life in an SAS squadron?
Still, I guess, a young age, I've passed the course. In one Para, being in the signals communications platoon, we had a bit more, I guess, freedom of movement. We had a great boss, Captain Dick Trigger. While we could say and do things, we had a little bit more freedom of movement from the guys in the rifle company. You really were there to just do as you're told and get on and get your job done before breakfast. But coming up to Hereford and passing the course, you were treated from really the get-go as an equal. So you could say and give an opinion on something. It may not have been the right opinion, but at least you could give it and you weren't heavily put down.
Moving on to the Falklands then, Nick. Where were you and what were you doing when the regiment got warned off for operations in the Falklands? And was there an opportunity to carry out any pre-deployment training?
The second part, pre-deployment training, no. The units and the squadrons, troops, always have the ability to move at little or no notice. Probably just come back off a major jungle training phase out in Kenya, and we've been working with other units out that way. So on the Friday, I think the 2nd of April, when the Argentinians invaded the Falklands, I don't recall hearing anything about it that Friday, but the Saturday night, we were in the Paragon Club. So on that Saturday night, we were warned off to mobilise and RV first thing on that Sunday morning. 4 of us were immediately tasked to go to one of the Army ordnance bases not too far away and collect all the squadron's war stock of ammunition. And then we moved up to RAF Bryce Norton, waited for the rest of the squadron to arrive. And then come the Monday morning, we're waiting then to get on an aircraft to Ascension Island. We see the Royal Marine party that had been down in the Falklands, sadly all had to surrender. And then they were coming back in. And while we couldn't talk to them, we could see them sort of having a somewhat debrief and met by one of the Royal Marine senior officers.
There was a good documentary on recently about, I think it was Naval Party 8901, the Marines you refer to. It was on a lot of documentary coverage about the Falklands the last couple of months have been pretty poor, but that was one of the better ones. And I didn't realise what a stiff fight they did put up.
Yeah.
And they were treated quite badly from that documentary, says, on their return. And most of them actually then volunteered and went back out again as part of the task force.
So sadly, I don't even think our bosses could get a chance to go and talk to them. So we went on one of the RAF sort of commercial jets, took us to Ascension Island. We were there for, I can't remember the exact time frame now, but 5 or 6 days. And while we're there waiting for permission and orders to join ships and go further south, we went through practices on communications, medical, 81mm mortars. Our boat drills, predominantly it's going to be a boat operations down south, runs up the local mountain, and again, just say, waiting for our bosses to get us deployed further south.
Ascension it was quite hot when you were there, wasn't it, Nick? If I remember rightly.
Definitely hot. I mean, hotter than a hot thing.
Yeah, Jimmy Moran was saying you could see sharks off the boats, and for a jumping off stage to essentially an Arctic warfare environment must have been a bit strange.
Yeah, I guess there was, I think, for all the units, going if you passed through Ascension while it was steaming hot, then it took days, weeks to get down into the war zone, and obviously in that period of time you're in theory getting acclimatized by the cooler, colder, freezing weather.
So the journey from the Ascension Island then, as you're going south, how was you going to get there, and what was your priorities on board the ship?
So once permission had been granted, the squadron jumped on about 3 or 4 different Navy vessels and Navy support vessels. If I remember correctly, HMS Brilliant Antrim, HMS Plymouth, which at the time was a 21-year-old frigate, a support ship called Fort Austin. So we deployed across those 4 odd ships. And then we obviously begin to move south, which takes a bit of time. And all we can do is go through planning, preparation, looking at potential options for the mission as we sort of head towards South Georgia. I remember the older air troop guys who were parachute square trained, whereas I was Halo trained. I was only trained at the time on round high altitude parachute systems. So they brought down with them 5 or 6 civilian square parachutes. So they did some parachute drops from the Navy helicopters out into the middle of the Ogden. The boat troop guys were doing their boat drills. We would join them to assist them in what they were doing, but also for us to learn how to get on and off ships into the small boats.
Would you get a lot of feed from the UK at the time about what was going on, what the situation was looking like?
Probably not from the UK. We were waiting predominantly for HMS Endurance, which was the Navy's Arctic survey ship, a big red and white ship, almost like, I think it's not sure it had icebreaking capability, but she was coming up from South Georgia, having helped out in the initial landings of a Royal Marine detachment down there to defend the place. They'd evaded, obviously, capture themselves. So as they came up and joined our small cruise south, I think the mountain troop initially went on board the HMS Endurance. More planning was being conducted for small boat operations in order to get ashore initially for reconnaissance purposes, and then to follow up with raids and the recapture of the island.
From chats we've had with Brummy and Jimmy Moram about 148 battery and 3-power in the Falklands, it's quite clear that a lot of the clothing and equipment back then was pretty basic. Maybe I've got high expectations here, Nick, but you being in a Special Forces unit, what was your clothing, kit and weapons like at the time?
Our clothing was the same as the rest of the British Army. Perhaps we had some Arctic Norwegian shirts. The mountain troop guys would have perhaps had better footwear and gaiters. Predominantly our clothing was the same as everyone else. There was no constraints in wearing what you wanted. Equipment was probably somewhat slightly better in so much as that your belt kit, the equipment that you wear around your waist, we could wear what we wanted, how we wanted, in what order, and put whatever we wanted in the pouches and containers, etc. I do recall wearing called an SAS waistcoat. It's sort of a plastic jerkin type effort. Back's got a large pouch on. Again, you can put your radios in it, demolition charges, food, and there's 2 big pouches on the front for similar items. It wasn't until later on, and some weeks into the conflict, we got issued Gore-Tex jackets which were lined. The QM back in Hereford had gone to civilian mountain clothing shops, purchased all these Gore-Tex jackets and got them shipped south, along with a heap load of homemade balaclavas and gloves from the wives and girlfriends. So the standard British Army issue of the SLR, the self-loading rifle 7.62, mixed with M16 AR-15s, but they all had 20-round magazines. Now, these days, for an M16 variant, they've all got 30-round magazines. GPMGs, 66s, 81mm mortar. It wasn't until later on that we got to the Falklands proper that we got a resupply from our sister unit in the US of M16A2s. They came with 30-round magazines, Stinger ground-to-air missiles, and there was an odd construction called an M202, which was a 4-barreled 66mm anti-tank weapon system. One of the guys humped it around for a while, but I think in the end he just gave it up and left it on the ship. It was never used. Communications-wise, squadron headquarters and regimental headquarters with the CO managed to get himself deployed as well. So they all had satellite communications back to Whitehall in the UK and back to Hereford.
Equipment and clothing is always interesting to a soldier, and not so much maybe the army wasn't investing in clothing, but a lot of the textiles and clothing like Gore-Tex just didn't exist back then. It's coming online and roundabout then, and a lot of the technology didn't really exist. And I think you'll cover a bit later on in the podcast, Nick, but HF comms and one-time pads, which were used in the Second World War, were still in use with your unit, I think.
Yeah, definitely. What the one-time pad, that method of coding, it's only the patrol signaller and the headquarters signals element know what's in that pad. And if even to a certain extent, even if it was captured, which did happen later on for one of the patrols, the codes are easily changed out pretty quickly, and you've got to know how to use it. Obviously, got to be trained on the system.
We were still using one-time pad to the 1990s in our unit.
It works.
Yeah, absolutely. It does work. It's just a bit... My mathematics weren't actually. Because trying to do it when I'm tired and my fingers were numb. Oh, God. Nick, can you talk us through the ground campaign from your perspective, leading up to the Argentinian surrender?
We start off, obviously, in South Georgia. By now, us within the air troop, we're on HMS Endurance. We know the Navy's warned us off that there's an Argentinian submarine in the area. So HMS Endurance is hugging the coast, hiding away around South Georgia, just trying to keep out of the way. One of the Navy's auxiliary ships with the Marine Commando on board has had to go further out to sea. HMS Plymouth and one of the ships is not too far away, but all spaced out, trying to evade being detected by the submarine. while we're hugging the coast, an Argentinian military Boeing aircraft is conducting surveillance over the island, probably under 10,000 feet. We can see it quite clearly, but we can't shoot at it. War's not been declared, so we can only watch but not shoot. The main task of reconnaissance fell to our boat troop, as you can imagine, and also the mountain troop. The only way the mountain troop will get ashore is by helicopter, and a decision was made, right or wrongly at the time, to get up onto one of the highest points on South Georgia, the Fortuny Glacier. Didn't overlook Grytvik and the main whaling station, but it was above it. And so the aim was to get up high and then, using their mountain skills, come and descend the glacier, get into a point where they could observe Grytvik. Unfortunately, the weather conditions in South Georgia, they'll change faster than a British winter in the Brecon Beacons. They suffered a whiteout almost immediately. They tried to hang on as long as they could. Kit was getting blown away. They called for a heli off the mountain. The helicopters came in. But if I get it right now, there was at least 2 of those helicopters crashed with the guys on board. They've scrambled out. Everyone's okay, including the air crew. And then eventually a third Wessex helicopter comes in, but she's predominant role is an anti-submarine helicopter. So she's got a ton of equipment in the back. There's not enough space to put your cat in, never mind a mountain troop and crew from other helicopters. They all get in somehow, and that Wessex manages to descend the mountain and get back to the ship and get everyone safe again. The boat troop guys, again, obviously trying to infiltrate. For a time, the engines have been playing up. They knew about it, but obviously they attempted to get ashore. I think maybe there was 4 Gemini boats. I think at least 3 of them had engine failure, and 1 or 2 of them getting towed ashore by the one good Gemini and its engine. The 4th one got separated. Maybe it was on a different mission into a different bay, but got separated from everyone else and drifted out to sea. They didn't want to get their TACB, the ground-to-air comms, up and running to go on a rescue mission, but they didn't want the Argentinians to know we were in the area. So they continued to drift, trying to get the engine going, just making the best of it as they could. And then eventually they saw, I think it's the same Wessex helicopter and its crew that had picked the guys up glacier. They saw it in the distance, opened up the radio, a quick burst transmission. Hey, we're over here. Helicopter picks them up. Obviously, they closed the radio down there. And if they hadn't been seen, they would have been doing Shackleton's route to South Georgia in reverse.
A few of the accounts of the Falklands where I've read, these small boat infiltrations were hugely dangerous in themselves, from what I understand, Nick, because the engines at the time weren't particularly reliable, and the same thing happened to a 148 battery patrol. They're trying to do an infill, and they caught up in a kelp bed, and these are massive seaweed beds out there, go at 30 metres deep, really, really thick, and the kelp managed to break the propeller, and they also ended up adrift for a while as well. So I don't think any time I'd been going into those boats, it must have been quite a nerve-wracking experience, I'd imagine.
Yeah, lucky for me, I wasn't in one of the Geminis at all. We're on Endurance, still waiting to get ashore at some point, depending on what our task at mission is. And then the Argentinian submarine is seen on the surface coming out of Grytvik and maybe a couple of miles out. So the Navy get the Wessex helicopters, the Wasp helicopters, up off the ships armed with their rockets and machine guns. So they go into the attack onto the conning tower of the submarine, beating the hell out of it. So the submarine can't now get underwater because the conning tower is being shot up. I remember the Wasp helicopter pilot coming back to HMS Endurance with a huge big grin on his face and shouting at the crewmen, you need to rearm me. So more rockets are put on board. He's still got the grin on his face and he's heading back out to the submarine. So we're still waiting to task the bosses on the Navy side and our boss have made it almost, I guess, the same instantaneous decision. We've got the submarine on the surface. Well, let's keep, they all know we're here. Let's keep this battle going, or let's get troops ashore. Unfortunately for M Company of the Marines, they're too far out to sea, too far away, so that they can't get into the combat. So the mountain troop and squadron headquarters is airlifted off of their ships, put down a short distance away from Grytvik, and they start the tab into Grytviken. They've got heli support up, Navy gunfire support if they need it. They've taken at least one Milan post with them. I did hear a story afterwards that they, looking ahead, they could see some small heads bobbing up and down in the tussock grass. So they threw a Milan missile at it, and it wasn't until afterwards, after they passed it, that it was found to be a bunch of walruses.
Very pissed off, the survivors.
Yeah, definitely. Us as the air troop, we're still on endurance, still waiting to get deployed. There's a patrol of SBS with us, but sadly that didn't happen because the mountain troop guys, along with the squadron headquarters, take Grytviken without any real fighting. The Argentinians gave up very quickly. That night, now we're tasked with HMS Plymouth and HMS Endurance to get into the next major bay and the whaling station there called Leith, which we know the Argentinian Navy SF guys are stationed at. We've done, I guess, risk assessments, in-depth planning. We've looked at the likely helicopter landing points and determined that those would have been mined. It was also detected. I'm not sure if the information actually came up from one of the boat crews that got ashore on a recce onto Grass Island. So it was determined where the command and control post was. So as we sailed into Leith Bay, the Navy broadcast to the Argentinians that they better surrender. If they didn't, then the Navy ships would open up. And they targeted this small hillock behind the whaling station, which had been identified as their command and control point. We were then put ashore that night through the kelp from the Navy small boats, and the air troop and the mobility troop and some SBS guys got into different fire positions, waited till first light, and then the Argentinians had already agreed to surrender. They came out. Their leader was a guy called Captain Aztez. He surrendered to the SBS captain and the mountain troop staff sergeant. He was wanted for war crimes, I think, by the UN because of his the atrocities he carried out during civil actions in Argentina. So he was taken on board Endurance, kept separate from the rest of his troops. So eventually they all came on, and I can't remember how they got on board now, but they were all put on board Endurance and into the forward hold. They were kept in there. Endurance and the rest of that small task force is now heading up the Falklands proper and to join the carrier group or carrier groups that have headed down south with the Marines and powers on. The last part then of South Georgia were in heavy seas, moving up the Falklands, but we're down in the mess decks with the SBS guys and sharing a vast amount of captured Argentinian Amstel beer with different weapon systems rolling around the deck.
I've just read or listened to on Audible, actually, Cedric Delves' book, Across an Angry Sea. Was he your squadron commander, Nick, was it?
Yeah, so Cedric Delves was the squadron boss, Major Delves at that time.
In that book, he is quite interesting because he brings up that the brigade headshed didn't really know what to do with the SAS troops when they turned up. And I think that's a lot to do with the fact that the SAS in the decades previously had been sort of doing those withdrawal from empire wars, in the Dauphin and all those types of places. And I get the impression that perhaps the SAS wasn't really working with the sort of the Green Army as much, so the planners and the people in charge would know what to do with you. Did you get any feeling for that at your level at that time, that, that people didn't quite know how to deploy you or use you to your best ability?
Not at my level. I'll say at the time I was 24 years old. I was only a trooper, not long in the squadron. But I do know that the SAS weren't on the Army's orbit for combat operations. It was to one side doing its own thing, as you said. The war in Oman and southern Oman in Dauphin, stopping the Yemeni communists taking over the country. So we weren't in the conventional war footing with the rest of the military. That's obviously changed for the better at post then and today. So the bosses were continuously looking at ways to get us involved in the fight. I guess sometimes even though our initial deployment was all done under the radar, we were doing stuff moving ahead of the main military effort before the military even thinking about it. And then they realised we're there. So we're under the Navy task force, both D Squadron and then G Squadron had been brought down, and it was then determined that G Squadron would do all the reconnaissance on Falkland with the OPs, and some were out there for 20 or 30 days, and that D Squadron would remain and be the assault raiding squadron, which is great. G Squadron sat in an OP and we're going from one raid and activity to the next. So fantastic.
So that leads us on nicely to the Pebble Island raid, which really takes you back to the roots of the SAS in the Western Desert, with the raids on German airfields with Paddy Blair Main, and I believe during the Second World War, I think the SAS destroyed more aircraft than the RAF did. Getting an opportunity to do a raid on Pebble Island, Nick, that must have been quite exciting.
So the raid started off, obviously I guess it came out of the blue, because there was a Harrier raid coming back to the carrier, and they reported a radar ping coming from or the vicinity of Pebble Island, which lies just to the north of West Falkland. So they needed more investigation. The squadron boss, the CO, looked at the ground, looked at how we could perhaps get involved. I'm not sure if they had any aerial photography at the time. A mission was presented to the Navy chain of command, and it was decided to put reconnaissance onto the island. That task fell to our boat troop. So they were dropped off by helicopter with their Klepper canoes, which are folding German-designed manufactured canoes, dropped off on West Falkland, and then they tabbed with those canoe systems to the coast, reassembled them, and then canoed across quite a dangerous strait of water. The tide and the currents coming through there, from what I've read, can be extremely dangerous. They get ashore onto Pebble Island, do their reconnaissance, and they determine that there's a large number of Pucara and other aircraft sat on the airfield. There's a number of Argentinian troops around. That messaging is all they obviously sent back, as you said, Kev, Morse code, OTP, back to the carrier. The squadron's given permission to conduct its raid. So more planning, preparation, again, within a very, very short period of time, we're launching from the carrier flight deck. There was a delay in getting off the carrier, I think due to heavy seas and the winds. That had an impact later on the raid. But we get airborne in the Sea Kings. I can't remember how many Sea Kings took us in now, but they drop us off to a small beach cove on Pebble Island. We're obviously met by the boat troop boss and a number of his teams. Everyone gets off. We're all obviously more than bombed up, but every man's carrying an additional 2 81mm mortar rounds. And then we start off as a squadron snake from the heli info point towards the airfield at Pebble Island. Point to note here is that the mobility troop had been given the task as the primary demolition team for destroying the aircraft up there, and the mountain troop were the secondary demolition team. I think we as 16 troop, the air troop, led the way with squadron headquarters to short of the airfield and short of the village at the airfield, or close to the airfield. The 81mm mortar team gets set up. We all drop off with great relief our 81mm mortar bombs. So then it found out that the mobility troop have been misplaced at that particular moment in time. And so now the task for airfield demolition has fallen to the mountain troop. So they're happy guys. They got a definite mission, whereas before they were in reserve. Mobility troop still out there making its way to the squadron RV in the mortar position.
It's good to see, Nick, that even special forces get geographically misplaced.
Yeah. Sorry, yeah, they weren't lost. They were just misplaced. They knew where they were. Yeah, so we as the air troop, we set off for the village. We've done our checking of what's around and where we think the Argentinian forces could be inside the village. All these villages across the Falklands have got large sheep shearing sheds, so it's determined that the troops will be in there, but the officers will be billeted in the houses of the islanders. So we begin to set off. We're in an open line formation, moving across a sort of open ground. We get to hedges and fence lines every now and then, but we're bounding forward. The mountain troop, obviously they've disappeared with huge big grins on their faces towards the airfield and their aircraft demolition task. Oh, so we also had an NGS officer assigned to the squadron for naval gunfire support from HMS Glamorgan. And when the time came for the assault to start, he was putting down a loom over a small mountain that overlooked the airfield. That was quite good support from the Navy. I can't remember which ship was doing the naval gunfire support. So as we, as a troop, tabbing into the village, our mission is to act as a cut-off for any Argentinians that are suddenly going to come out once they know that airfield's under attack. So we're to cut them off, perhaps get into the village, deal with the issue there. But as we're tabbing along, we're stopped. The squadron boss is told to pause. So we obviously get down, waiting, and then we have to move back. And this is all to do with the delay coming off the carrier in the first place. So now it's having an impact on the squadron's time on the island. The squadron boss is concerned that if we don't get the mission completed within a very, very tight time frame, we won't get the Sea Kings back in and we won't make it back to the carrier. We began to pull back, and then we go forward again, and then we come back, and then we go forward again. So then there's an argument further down the troop line, or extended line, between some of the senior guys in the troop, and I think it's a troop staff sergeant. So it's a loud whisper because we're tactically moving forward, but this whisper's getting louder and more heated. And then it's followed by a couple of large whacks and groans as there was a small fist fight. So basically the older guys in the troop, as we were, keen to get stuck into the village and do what we had to go and do. But there's that constraint that we can't move any further forward. There was a small fist fight. Me and my mate looking at each other. He hadn't been in the squadron that long either. And again, we're thinking, we're in the SAS, but we're fighting amongst ourselves and not getting stuck into the village. Yeah, so the mountain troop hit the airfield with their 66s, the machine guns, rifle fire, demolition charges, and they take out 11 aircraft from Bakara ground attack aircraft, I think, to a Skyvan type of aircraft. As they moved back to the squadron RV, having completed their task, there was a cratering charge set off by the Argentinians, and at least one of the mountain troop guys suffered concussion from that charge, but no other main injuries were sustained by anyone. And then we moved back to the squadron RV with the 81mm mortars. By then, the mobility troop, who were missing in action, have now turned up. So
the distraction force.
Yeah. So we're now into all-round defence. Obviously, comms have been sent out to the carrier to get the Sea Kings back in. So while we're waiting there, some of the old and bold Dhofar campaign guys or whatever they were from stood up, talking too loudly as if nothing had really happened. It's dark. I'm being bold, and one of the youngest guys in the squadron, shout up, get down, keep quiet. It's not over yet. And probably there was a little bit of a moan, but they did as told and kept quiet and got down. If it was daylight, maybe I wouldn't have gobbed off so much.
I mean, that raid must have been a massive impact on the Argentinians, on their capabilities, and a little bit on their morale as well, to know that someone's came in and smashed it.
Yeah, and literally was smashed. I think you say 11 aircraft taken out, which has stopped that capability of those aircraft hitting the troops in San Carlos in the later days. There must have been some aircraft still there, or they may have come in from further in West Falkland as the beachheads got established. To finish off that particular raid, the Sea Kings come back in, and we obviously fly back out to the carrier. I guess almost immediately we go down to the ship's galley and line up for a big hearty after post-raid breakfast, dressed in our cam stuff or weapon systems, etc. One of the Navy chefs suddenly shouts out to one of the guys in the squadron lined up and calls him by his first name and says, "What are you doing dressed in all that kit? Why aren't you back here with the rest of us, chefs, slop jockeys?" And this guy, he passed selection maybe 2 or 3 years before I had, and he'd left the Royal Navy, become a civilian, because in those days, a Navy guy or a Royal Marine couldn't transfer directly from the senior service down into the Army. So they had to get out, become a civilian, and then do the TA Reserve Army SAS selection course. They'd pass that, and then they could come on regular selection. So this guy here, he's left the Navy as a chef, gone into combat with us, etc. He's lined up at the cookhouse. His mates have recognised him. His face has probably gone that red under the cam cream. But there, you've got the original Steven Seagal within the unit.
Shortly after that, Nick, you suffered a significant loss when a Sea King went down. Can you just talk a bit about that?
In brief, then, we'd moved, the squadron was what the Navy called cross-decking from one ship to the next. Moved from the carrier to one of the two assault ships, HMS Intrepid. I and most of the air troop and those that had been hellied over some hours before. There were members of 3 Para on board the assault ship as well. The last lift off the carrier was with a small element of our squadron headquarters, the squadron sergeant major, our support staff, the mountain troop, a number of the mountain troop guys, elements from the G squadron headquarters and one of their troops. So on that airlift over, their Sea King, as we know, goes down. It was determined, rightly or wrongly, that an albatross had struck the aircraft and it immediately went into the drink. It's dark now. I mean, it's pitch black. So the Navy knows it's gone down. We're alerted, I think, as everybody else is on the ship. I get onto deck. Intrepid slowly moving towards the potential crash site, as is other Navy vessels. Helicopters are up with their searchlights. And we're way out to sea from the Falklands, so the priority now is to look for survivors and get them out. I can't remember how many people did survive. 5 or 6, or maybe a couple of others have got out at the Sea King. They were picked up. I never saw any of those guys come onto the assault ship. Sadly, the body of the Royal Marine Corporal Love, he was on the raid with us onto Pebble Island, one of the crewmen there. He didn't survive, and his body was brought back on board the assault ship. So it wasn't until the next morning that we, could determine the complete loss of guys that went down on the Sea King. One of the guys that got out is a guy called Mark Splash Ashton from the Mountain Troop. He's recently produced a book called Sea King Down, and it describes, obviously in more detail, the crash of the Sea King, getting out of the aircraft before it disappeared completely under the waves. What's probably more remarkable is that while Splash, along with 5 or 6 others, got out and were taken to the various Navy ships for medical care, Splash managed somehow to get himself back into the combat zone. So he got himself off the recovery process, didn't allow himself to get fully in. If he got to, I think, one of the Red Cross designated hospital ships, he couldn't, by international law, he wouldn't have been allowed to get back into the combat zone. But he bluffed his way and got himself off the ship onto an assault landing boat, joined one of the other ships, and got himself back into the fight. Sea King Down by Splash, Mark Ashton, is definitely worth a read of his account of the Falklands War.
And obviously at that point, Nick, things are moving quite fast, and you wouldn't have been given much time to think about the impact of that on you, and because you're moving on to the San Carlos landings. What did you do there as part of the operation to land at San Carlos?
The mountain troop has lost quite a lot of people, experienced people. The squadron sergeant major Lawrence has gone as well. But as you said, we've still got to get on with our jobs, our tasks. The main landings are about to happen. I can't remember the exact time frame between the Sea King going down and then us getting ashore, but it must have been a day or two. So there's about 5 of us, approximately, are assigned from the air troop to the mountain troop under Captain John Hamilton to take part in diversion raids on the outskirts of Darwin and Goose Green. The whole squadron has that mission, but we're split down into the 4 troops and given 4 different areas of operations outside Darwin and Goose Green. So we're inserted. Maybe there's about 10 of us in that mixed troop of mountain and air. At that time, there are no other British military on the island apart from the G Squadron observation patrols around Stanley, and maybe some SBS teams as well. But we're dropped off by Sea King. The helicopter lifts off. It's pitch black. It's gone quiet, and I'm thinking, this is it. There's no one else here. It's just us. And we've got to go on and do our mission. We can't get off until it's done. So anyway, we pick ourselves up and move off to one of the target farmhouses on the outskirts of Darwin. I'm the lead scout. Obviously got my M16, but I'm also carrying an MP5 SD, the silenced version, in an effort to take out any sentries that we might come across. We've got one set of night vision goggles, and the guy that's carrying that, he gets ahead every now and then and looks ahead. We get to the farmhouse, recce it, determine that there's no one there, no civilians, no Argentinian military. The other troops, a similar task, and at the appointed time, we then just open up into the heavens, into the open ground with our weapon systems, machine guns, rifles, illume, just making as much weapon noise as we can in order to give the impression to the Argentinians as at least a battalion-size attack coming their way. So those are diversionary, noisy attacks all went down, and now we've got to tab back out to San Carlos. So the 4 troops are obviously moving independently. They head towards the squadron RV. I recall getting into there, and I'm not sure then if the squadron headquarters under the squadron boss come in, but then we see a Picara aircraft go past, comes outside of a hill, sort of partly out of sight to us, and is heading up towards the beachhead, closely followed by a Stinger missile. The Stinger takes it out, the aircraft crashes, the pilot got out, and initially we thought, that was the Powers or someone at the beachhead has taken the aircraft out. But then the rest of the air troop come in, and one of the guys, there's 2 guys have been trained up over a couple of hours on the carrier of how to use the Stinger missile, which again has come from our sister unit in the States. Sadly, the guy that collected the weapon systems from the States and knew how to work them, he sadly died in the sinking that went down. That Picara has gone down. The squadron's now all complete, and then it's making its troops snake back up towards 2 Paras lines and San Carlos. More Picaras coming overhead. The 2 guys with the Stingers are launching their Stingers at the aircraft. The mobility troop of the lead troop in that formation, but for some reason or other, but because the Picaras are proper aircraft and not jets, the Stingers go nowhere near the aircraft and land 50 to 100 meters in front of the mobility troop, who obviously stop and start screaming back at the guys to stop firing the Stingers and just leave it.
They're not having a very good time, that trip, are they?
No.
No, they didn't. It wasn't lovely walk. So we continued tabbing up towards 2 Paras lines. One of the main concerns for everyone on both sides, maybe not 2 Paras, was that we're coming in from enemy-held country. While they knew we were out there and they knew our rough, line and direction of approach, there had to be a recognition signal. We were told to take the Army rifle cleaning cloth, the 4 inches by 2 inches white cloth that you clean your weapon systems with, take some long strips of it and wrap it around your head, and that will be your individual collective recognition signal to 2 Para that we are friendly guys and we're not Argentinians.
Bear in mind what you've done so far, Nick. That must have been one of the more arse-twitching moments so far, approaching a heavily armed parachute battalion with nothing but 4x2's recognition.
Yeah, no, definitely, it definitely was. But given their due, they had been briefed up. They knew to expect us. But as soon as we got into the lines, then we took the ridiculous white bandolas off our heads. So for some of the squadron guys who'd been in 2 Para, they recognised some of their mates now, so they met up, had a brew. Obviously, more troops are coming ashore. The Marines, 3 Para, the Navy are moving their ships in. Oh, sorry. Also on that tab out, and obviously prior to meeting up with 2 Para, some Argentinian fast jets went past, really low, as you'd expect. We all opened up with our weapon systems, but I was struggling to get my 66mm anti-tank weapon system off my back and get it out and cocked and firing up. But obviously, that jet's moving before I could, even partly get it off, but the thought was there.
I think that's optimism at its best, Nick.
Yeah, it would have been brilliant if it happened. Yeah. So we get back into 2 Paras lines, I guess a tactical pause. I think even the squadron boss wasn't too sure what was going to happen to us at that point, how we're going to, say, get back onto the ship or how we're going to operate then on the ground. So there's a couple of scout helicopters buzzing around, dropping troops and ammunition off. Myself and one of the guys, we call in one of the scout helicopters. He lands. We jump on board, recognise the crew because we've been working with them in Kenya previous couple of months, and say, take us to a ship, which they do. They take us to, I think it was an RFA ship called Sir Lancelot. So the next hour or two, the rest of the squadron join us, and that ship then became the squadron's forward operating base throughout the rest of the war. So all our missions were planned and launched from that ship. So that was the end of that part of the campaign. We're now back with the task force ashore, per se.
So what was the next operation you undertook?
So now we've been tasked to move up to Mount Kent. It's approximately 40 miles away from the beachhead and can overlook Stanley. The squadron's mission there is to conduct reconnaissance, observe the ground, and hold that ground until Marine Commando units can be brought in to, I guess, keep the momentum, keep the advance going in the overall ground campaign. There was a pause, I think, before we were given that task, maybe a week plus. In the meantime, 2-Para, as we know, were tasked to launch into and take down Goose Green. From a strategic picture, you've got the landings taking place. You've got 2-Para into and taking Darwin and Goose Green. So now more effort is going to be made on the Argentinians. So we're launched up to Mount Kent. Again, Navy Sea Kings, they launch us from our ship. It's heavy mist on the ground. We launch and head off up to Mount Kent. There is some flak comes up from some Argentinian positions en route to the mountain. Get up to the mountain, and we're all dropped off, and each troop is assigned to a different position round the mountain. We had, from our position, a view of Stanley, which is lit up, and now, we can see the end game.
Mount Kent, from my understanding, was quite strategic, and it could also overlook all the other mountains that needed to be taken before the advance on Stanley. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I think we can see 3-Para's objective at Longdon. We probably can't see Wireless Reach. We can see Royal Marine objectives. So again, it's reporting what we can see and see happening on those mountains back to the task force and then down to the individual units that are going to be tasked to take out those objectives. We're up maybe about 4 or 5 nights into the mountain, doing the job and the task there, holding ground, doing reconnaissance, looking. And then at last light, on say this 4th night, overlooking our objective, our position down toward Estancia House on the coast, 2 Argentinian Huey helicopters came into view and were heading basically towards the troop position. The squadron boss and other troops, I think the mountain troop had seen it as well. So the squadron boss tasked us to go and conduct a hasty ambush. Most of us leave the troop position. I think we left a GPMG team up there. We moved down in cover through the rocks and the high cliff faces down to the mortar position. By that time, the Argentinian Hueys had stopped short of maybe about 100 plus meters of the mountainside and drop off approximately 8 of their people. So we're now in a hasty ambush position. And when it's hasty, it is hasty. You're just scrambling to get somewhere where you can see the enemy approaching and be in a position to open up on them. And all that's happened very, very quickly. The guys, enemy, are dropped off. They're walking towards us. We open up. I can't recall exactly, but I'm pretty sure the 81mm mortar crew put up a loom. So we're open up on the Argents. They had very good drills. We understood later that they were from an Argentinian SF unit called 601, or was it 602 company. They immediately went into their contact drills. They ditched their Bergens. They started putting fire back and splitting up. So we're putting fire into them and vice versa. One of our guys got wounded. A couple of guys got frag. I'm up with the troop boss sort of right and forward, putting rounds down. As I said, obviously there's rounds coming back in, then cutting up the ground. You can't go any lower because you're on the rock face already. So the firefight ensures there's a bit of a pause in the fighting. The Argentinians are not firing back. So the guy with a one set of night vision goggles gets up, comes across to me. I've grabbed one of the wounded guys' M203s, which has got the 30mm grenade launcher underneath. And so between me and the MVG guy, we start lobbing 30mm grenades towards some Argentinians we can see further out, getting fire direction orders from the MVG guy. They then call off, the firefights completely over, and that's the end of that firefight. I think if I recall correctly, one of the Marine Commandos have now started to come in by helicopter. Obviously, their pilots and the guys on board are seeing this huge firefight going off, tracer, loom cracking off left, right and centre. I think some of their troops from the anti-aircraft teams, the blowpipe teams, managed to get out the helicopters before the helicopters have to off and get back to San Carlos. Got a couple of Marine blowpipe team guys up there. The troop have now come back to the mortar team's position, and I recall thinking to myself, I've still got 2 grenades in my pouch. Why the hell didn't I throw them? Why didn't I use them? And I'm cursing myself, in all everything else that's going on. I've forgotten about these 2 grenades. So a bit disappointed in that effort. We had a couple of wounded, one guy pretty seriously, and a couple with shrapnel wounds. X number of enemy killed or wounded. So we go back up to our position and sort of get our heads down for the night with an effort to conduct a clearing patrol in the morning. I got up on the mountain with more sort of guns, bullets and ammo, and I ditched certain key elements, like my sleeping bag. I probably had a Gore-Tex bivvy bag with me, but I ditched my sleeping bag because I wanted space and weight up there with other stuff. I've been freezing my arse off the last 4 nights or so. So the clearance patrol goes out in the morning, can't find any of the Argentinians. They've all scooped during the night. But we then bring back in all their ditch Bergens. And they also found some bandages, first aid kit where we wounded some of the guys. We go through the Bergens and pulling out brand new sleeping bags and MVGs, really good winter warfare equipment. And to say most of it is brand new. So now I've got an Argentinian sleeping bag. So I'm now a happy man.
Surprised nobody tried to pull rank on you, Nick, and take that off you.
I kept it for a good number of years. I've no idea where it is now. But yeah, it was a godsend. I think at that time as well, there's some, perhaps because of the firefight, some Argentinian artillery came in, not enough really to worry about. Then the following night, the rest of that Marine Commando came in, and some of our guys were tasked to take them up to their positions. I was tasked to guide into our position an Army artillery FOO and his team. And at the same time, maybe it was the next day, commandos came in. 148 batteries were brought up as well. They established themselves and quickly got up to action. So we probably got, again, a small time frame before the helis are coming back in to lift us off back to the FOB ship. But we take the opportunity to go down to the gun positions and fire a couple of shells off towards the Argentinians. One thing to recall about the Mount Kent operation, a war reporter called Max Hatings. So he came in, I think, on that first, he came in on that first heli lift with the Marines while a firefight was going on and got himself off the aircraft. X number of hours later, we're at the mortar position with our wounded. He wanders up out the dark with his Barber wax jacket on, looking very much the English country gentleman. We don't know who he is, obviously, at all. Starts chatting to us and asks if we got a spare weapon he could have. And there are weapons there because we've got wounded. There's no way on earth is he all going to give one. So he's been politely told to F off, and off he wanders into the night and goes off.
He liberated Stanley on his own.
Yeah, he tried to take credit for liberating Stanley, didn't he?
Yeah, first man in, or something like that.
So what was the next stage after that then, Nick?
So we're pulled back to the forward operating base on the ship. We're not really knowing what to expect and what our next missions are, but we're expecting to get back, get food, a hot shower, and wait to retask. For our patrol, that lasted about an hour. There was no food, there was no hot shower. We were straight into a briefing for a reconnaissance observation patrol to get into West Falkland. Our orders were to look for Argentinian drop zone parties, the communications guys, the ambulances, the medics that would form up on any drop zone, because information had come in from various sources that the Argentinians were going to do a parachute infill into West Falkland, which with whatever aircraft they could muster, their C-130s, whatever cargo aircraft that had a parachute capability. So our job as that 4-man patrol was to start this initial phase of looking for that, identifying and looking for the DZ parties. So we retasked, got our orders, new comms, re-ammoed, got more food, and then we jump on a Sea King and wait to lift off from the ship. But really heavy mist had come down. The crew can't take off in those conditions. So after about 45 minutes, the aircraft closes down, and then we're back inside the ship. Can get hot food, can get a shower, which obviously all the guys ashore from the Paras and the Marines, etc., had no chance of getting. So the next night, the mission goes ahead. We launch and get onto West Falkland, tab around into different positions, start reporting back. I'm the patrol signaller, sending the information back out to the squadron headquarters. Maybe we're 3 or 4 nights up there, and we're now expecting to get, or we're told we're getting pulled back to the carrier, expecting a Sea King or a Wessex to come and pick us up. It does. We jump on board, and there's the rest of the troop, plus some from guys from B Squadron, all armed up with Stingers, machine guns. We've no idea what's happening. The heli then takes us as a complete troop with the other guys round to another part of West Falkland, and we get off, and then we're briefed up that the mission is still on, but now it's definitely expected that there will be an Argentinian parachute infill. So the troop mission is to, again, report of any DZ parties forming up, but as and when enemy aircraft came overhead, then the Stingers, the machine guns, would open up on those aircraft and parachutists coming down. It never happened. Information was probably correct at the time, but the Argentinians never launched a parachute infill into West Falkland.
Probably fortunate for them, because I think it would have been a bit of a suicide mission. Never mind the reception party you'd have provided at DZ. I think the air defence systems and the combat air patrols would have taken a heavy toll too. Yeah,
definitely. The Harriers would have been definitely on their tail. So while we're up there, 8 odd days, I can't exactly remember the time frame, but being the patrol signaller, getting obviously the comms up, it's all Morse code and one-time pad, as you said, Kev. So it's gone really cold. It's heavy snow's falling, and I get a message in that one of our mountain troop patrols have been compromised. Have been overlooking Port Howard, and the patrol boss, which actually the mountain troop boss, Captain John Hamilton, who was awarded a military cross posthumously, was killed in action because the OP was discovered by the Argentinian Marines. The guys there, John Hamilton and his signaller, one of the SAS blokes in mountain troop, put up obviously a fearsome fight as they tried to withdraw out of contact. John Hamilton was killed, and the signaller was captured. So he's got all his codes on him, obviously the radio. He's brought back into Port Howard, interrogated. They're looking through all his kit and his codes, etc. He was an Italian speaker, and so Italian language and Spanish have some similarities, so he could pick up some of the stuff that he was being told about. And one of those was that there was a real threat that they would get him out and back to mainland Argentina. If that had happened, we probably wouldn't have seen him again. But they kept him in Port Howard, out of sight of the villagers, under the floorboards in one of the houses. And he stayed there until the war was over, and then some of the troops came and picked him up. So the guy that was captured, while he could speak Italian, he had and Captain Hamilton, they both had Argentinian 9mm pistols on them, which they'd got from South Georgia, as a number of us had. And so he was questioned as to what and where, how did he get this Argentinian marked pistol? He's from the Seychelles, so he's not the white guy that the rest of us are. And he spins a story out that he's been tasked to join the captain as his signaller. He had never met him before, and his only job was to transmit the messages out from whatever the captain was telling him. And the pistol, the captain had given that to him. He didn't know where it came from, but so he was putting out the story that he was the subservient to the officer and just doing as he was told. And that probably story did help in perhaps saving his life, and maybe helped him not getting shipped back to Argentinian mainland.
And when we were prepping the pod, Nick, you were saying that the Argentinians provided a write-up that actually helped Captain Hamilton get his MC for the citation. Is that correct?
So the Argentinian Marines were obviously more than suitably, if that's the right term, impressed by the contact drills of Captain John Hamilton and his signaller. So they, I don't know how it must have come out after the war that said, no, this John, he needs a senior bravery medal for how he fought off the Argentinians for a certain amount of time and kept them at bay. So he then was awarded the military cross. He still lies buried at Port Howard, our only guy down there, apart from the guys out at sea.
So after that, what did you do next?
The next task, after we pulled back to the ship again, as a squadron, were then retasked to conduct clearance operations of some ground and diversionary assistance to Two Power's attack onto Wireless Ridge. So we're headed into really the east end of Wireless Ridge. It gets renamed Beagle Ridge at that point. We fly in, we go in via Three Power's location. They've now come up to Estancia House. I met there a Three Power colour sergeant who took me through Junior Parachute Company's training 7 or 8 years previously. So we had a good chat, but then we moved up to Beagle Ridge proper. Our job is to conduct clearance patrols. We came across one Argentinian observation post, which we did a quick assault on. That was quickly cleared out. And then a number of days later, or that night, we're tasked to conduct the diversion job for Two Power. So myself and my oppo, we've got the GPMG in the SF sustained fire role. We've got other SF machine gun teams up there from D and G Squadron. We've got Milan anti-tank posts up from G Squadron as well. So we're up on this ridge, tabbed out from the squadron RV, and at the appointed time, the squadron boss says, right, now just select a target where you think the Argentinians will be and just open up on them. So we can see the ridge in front of us is about 1,000 metres of open water, and then Stanley's just behind it. So we open up with the GPMG, what we think is a likely target, and then within minutes we've got an Argentinian AAA in the ground attack role opening up on us. The ground's getting eaten up by 30mm shells. Then, so we stop firing, obviously get down in the tussock grass. We actually start laughing because it's dangerous. It is really dangerous. You can hear these.
That's
rounds.
an understatement.
Well, you can hear the rounds pinging over our heads. The ground's getting whipped up around us. So that gun stops firing. We immediately get back onto our gun, open up on him because we could see where the tracer came from. Then another Argentinian AAA opens up to our left. We switch fire to that one. The ground starts getting cut up again. And then the first AAA opens up again. By that time, the rest of the squadron, only armed with their M16s and SLRs, they can't get into the fight because the distance is too great. So they're more than mad, shouting and telling us to up sticks and move the gun 100 metres plus to the left. So my mate, big strong guy, picks up the gun and the tripod complete. I've got all the ammunition, belted ammo, cans of ammunition. The troop boss comes up and gives us a hand. We leg it through the tussock grass, 100 odd metres, put ourselves back down and start re-engaging AAAs. So it's a fire at one, he fires at us, stop, pause, fire at one, and it goes on like that for 10 odd minutes. The rest of the troop squadron are happy because they're not getting shot at either. The boat troop guys, along with, they're getting infill from more or less the coast just below our position across this 1,000 metres of water by the Royal Marine Rigid Raiding squadron in their small fast boats. So they get put ashore on the area that we've been shooting up, but they are immediately seen by the Argentinians who rip up the boats with fire and push the boat troop guys off that small beachhead. They manage to get back into the Rigid Raider boats, and then they move out back across that 1,000 metres of water back to our side. They'd taken a couple of wounded at that point. In that 1,000 metres of water and close to our position was an Argentinian hospital ship, which had remained in darkness, but we could see it. Put all its lights on, it put its searchlights on, and then it began to illumine the small boats as they came back to our side. So I immediately wanted to open up on the hospital ship and knock all its lights out, but the troop boss rightly said, it's a hospital ship. Under the rules of law, no, you can't do it. So we packed up all our kit, the Milan crews, the GPMGs, and then we moved back through tussock grass over some sort of high ground back toward the squadron RV. In doing so, we must have then been spotted by Argentinian artillery spotters who then lobbed 5 or 6 artillery shells onto us. But we dropped down into a gully, then out of sight, and then moved our way off out of the area. Back to the squadron RV. Then the next morning, a heli arrives. It's got the regiment's CO on board, Mike Rose. So he's landed by helicopter. I think he comes in to pick up one of our Royal Signals Scalies, one of the signals guys, and then they head over to Stanley and to complete finishing off a successful negotiation with the Argentinian surrender.
It's interesting, Nick, that we started off, one of the points we made at the start was that the impression that we had as a main Kev, and sort of emphasised in Cedric Delves' book that the regular army didn't really know what to do with the SAS, but what you've described there, raids, reconnaissance, fighting patrols, OPs, I mean, that is a sort of the bread and butter of the Special Air Service. It all seemed to work out quite well in the end. Is that a fair point?
Yeah, absolutely. While the squadron boss, the CO, would have struggled at times to get the squadron deployed and get the agreements from task force headquarters back in the UK and off the carrier. Yeah, we were constantly on the move, like you just said. We're, raids onto Pebble Island, observation posts, assaults. We're doing in obviously the heavy fighting that the powers and Marines engaged into. But as you say, classic SAS behind the lines operations, constantly on the go, constantly planning. And we did have the luxury of going back to a ship every now and then.
Moving on to the final part of the podcast then, how did you recover back to the UK and what did you take out of that war from a personal perspective? What did you learn from it?
The squadron was moved back to the UK fairly quickly when we had no more tasking to do down there, so there's no point in us staying. We actually were a couple of weeks, maybe a month late in getting on our next task on the anti-terrorist team. Our time was due for that, and we're a month late. So it's essential that we get back to the UK. So the first C-130 that had a long range refueling capability landed at Stanley Airfield. As a squadron then, with our support element and probably some others, we were put onto the 130. And then after, I guess, many refuels, it landed back at Ascension Island, where we'd, in effect, started off. And then onto a VC-10, one of the commercial type Royal Air Force troop carriers, back into Bryce Norton, landed at 3 or 4 in the morning. Obviously, no reception parties, no banners flying, welcome home, boys. The custom guys met us, asked us if we'd got anything to declare. No, sorry, mate, we don't. Back on the army buses, back to Hereford, and that was it. That was the end of the campaign per se. We were then given a couple of weeks leave prior to getting onto the anti-terrorist team. But a couple of days after arriving back, it's spring, and I'm walking into the town from the camp, crossing over the old bridge across the River Wye, and I pause and just look at that, the blue waters, the blue skies, the greenery, the birds singing, people going about their daily business. And life's normal. And while I reflected back on where I've just come from and what I've been doing, now to see, life back in the UK, in Britain, it's beautiful. I'm obviously glad to be back, but I can't really reflect too much on what's happened. There's probably personal lessons learned, and we move on. We get back off leave and onto the anti-terrorist team, and we keep moving forward.
You'd achieved a lot at 24. You got into the parachute regiment, you got into the SAS at the young age of 22, and you'd fought in a war, doing your job, that you trained for. Was there not an element of what next after that? Just me personally, I would find that a very strange situation because you pretty much achieved probably all that you'd aimed for at that stage in your life, or am I off on the wrong track there?
No, you're definitely on the right track. And I guess, that's why I came to Hereford, to see combat. Life in the Paras was good, but there wasn't enough going on for me. Not that it was anything to do with the parachute regiment at the time. It was just the circumstances. So passing selection, getting into Northern Ireland with them, getting into the Falklands, being on the anti-terrorist team now for the second time. Other missions came up there, which are probably still classified. So, I've got to stay there. That's where the action's going to be in some way, shape or form. We travel the world. We go to some really interesting places. We've got really good people within the unit. We've got good command and control, and we're going from one task, be it an overseas mission to assist a foreign nation, to exercises, and just waiting for the next operational task to come up.
Nick, thanks for that. I mean, as I said before, listen to Jimmy's, listen to Brummy's, and I've read a lot of books, and I thought I knew a lot about the Falklands campaign, but there's always something new to find out. And from your perspective as well, you just don't get the ground up sort of stories that perhaps some of the previous authors who were like the senior people and their view of the Falklands gave. We'll move on to now Desert Island Dits, which, as we know, all our listeners look forward to, especially Colin's choices. And so, Nick, what we're after, obviously, is your choice of book, film, and luxury item. So, for this episode, what have you chosen?
The book choice is Penal Company by Phillip Neame. He was the OC of D Company 2 Para in the Falklands. I've recently read it. It's an in-depth account from his perspective as a company commander with D Company, who were classified as a penal company only because they were, to a certain extent, pushed out from the rifle companies into D Company because they were thought was a lost cause as such, which was completely untrue. D Company fought more than well under Phillip Neame down there in the Falklands. Film choice is The Hangover. I probably saw it more times than I know what to do with. It just reminded me of young drinking days in the Paras and early days as an SAS trooper. So luxury item would be a Swiss Army knife or a Gerber, a Leatherman. Obviously you've got the knife on there, great for survival situations. You've got different blades on it, pliers, etc. So luxury item choice of those on a desert island.
Can't fault that.
No. And Colin, obviously, your choice of book, because as we all know, we all look forward to your books.
I detect a bit of sarcasm there, Kevin. I just don't know if I'm quite happy with that, mate. I don't think you can challenge this one this week. I've referred to it a few times in the podcast. It's Across an Angry Sea by Lieutenant General Sir Cedric Delves, who was Nick's squadron commander during the Falklands. And he gets the title, really, I think he's tying it in with the James Elroy Flecker poem, The Golden Journey to Samarkand, which includes the famous line, "We are the pilgrim's master, we shall always go a little further. Beyond that last blue mountain barred with snow, across that angry or that glimmering sea." And that is, Nick was telling me a while back that's the official sort of poem for the SAS.
Yeah.
Nick, is that correct?
Yeah, it's all on the memorial stones. Yeah, and it's obviously recited time and time again. Yeah, great poem, and emphasises the breed of an SAS soldier.
Kev alluded to it already that Cedric Delves gives a good operational picture in this book about the troubles they had getting tasks initially, some of the conflicts of personalities, and he also describes the operations on the ground as well. So it's a really good book to read if you want the overall sort of bigger picture of how the SAS conducted operations in the Falklands. It's highly recommended. Nick, I've just got a quick question for you about books. I remember I first met you about 30 years ago now, and I remember it was sort of post-Gulf War, and the Andy McNabb books were coming out and all the rest of it. And I remember back then, I was talking to yourself and a couple of your colleagues, and you're quite sceptical about these sort of books. What do you make of sort of the burgeoning celebrityism behind the SAS with the Who Dares Wins on the telly and all that sort of thing? What's your thoughts on that?
I've never watched any of the programmes, and most of my colleagues won't do. There's no need to. We obviously know what we've done and how we've done it. Great, it's TV entertainment. Probably most of the guys that are on it are the celebrities. Apart from one guy, they have no real experience, depth of experience over a long period of time in which to draw on. So we don't. We might take the piss out of them, but that's probably about it.
So what's your book then, Kev?
Well, this week, or this episode, it's not a book, it's a podcast, as I've moved into the 21st century. Apparently, I'm not some Philistine that everyone thinks I am. And it's a podcast that was done by the BBC. It's a 9-part podcast about J. Edgar Hoover, who was the head of the FBI. And what a lot of people don't realise is he was the head of the FBI for over 37 years. And I've read his book, and I listened to the podcast that picks out some of the key elements. And what comes across is, at one stage, he was probably one of the most powerful men in America. He had naughty stories or dirt on every single politician, including presidents of the time. He had so much more influence than people realised, and he was able to shape the politics. And people were frightened of him. He was so powerful. They couldn't sack him. He had the photographs in the drawer. He had the tape machines. And the agency seemed to spend an enormous amount of time internally investigating politicians and other people of influence. If you think about the Stasi, it was very much that sort of some of the same model without obviously all the violence that went with it. But it's a really interesting background into a guy who had his own closets in his own cupboard as well. He had a number of floors. Was able
liked a bit of soft silk ladies' underwear.
But he was able to influence and manipulate so many powerful people in America and influence American political direction.
That's it. Thanks, Kev. And that's it for another episode. And thanks, Nick, for coming on the podcast, mate. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I thought you were going to ask me about cheese and chives, but that can wait for another podcast.
Larry will be listening into this. Yeah, I've already given feedback about that. And for the listeners, this is a sort of a special code word going back and forward between Nick and one of his colleagues. So thanks also to the listener for your continued support and suggestions. Please keep them coming, and our email and social media links are at the bottom of the show notes. You can find us on all the usual suspects, including Instagram, Facebook, YouTube and Twitter. If you've downloaded us from iTunes and like the podcast, it'd be great if you could leave us a review there or anywhere you get your podcast from, especially again Spotify as well. Thanks again to Nick Beale for his continued support and sponsorship to this series and offering technical support through his company ISARR. And we'll see you next time on The Unconventional Soldier.